Thank you so much for joining. I'm Shambhavi. I'm a strategist at Gender at Work India, and this is Circle Back, our monthly conversation series where we unpack institutions and how they shape individuals and cultures. Last month, we spoke about health equity with a focus on the right to health. And we had that conversation with the head of C Health, Vivek Diwan. You can find that discussion on YouTube and on our link tree. And the focus of today's conversation will be on belongingness. And we really want to delve into what it means to belong at work and how is belonging different from inclusion? Does it really matter? And we're so happy to be joined by Zahara Fernandes. Zahara is a managing director at Accenture, an IIM alumni, and a master black belt in Six Sigma. Zahara finds herself interested in statistics and passionately drives the purpose of inclusion, diversity, and equity as a business value proposition. Among her many accomplishments, Zahara was recently recognized among the top 100 LGBT plus future leaders and top 50 Ally Trailblazers in the outstanding LGBT plus role model lists of 2022. Thank you for joining us, Zahara. We're so happy to have you. We also have Jyotsna Siddharth. Jyotsna is the country director of Gender at Work India and an actor, artist, and writer. Jyotsna's practice spreads across institution building, intersectionality, arts, activism, theater, films, and development. This year, Jyotsna was a nominee for the Cosmopolitan Bloggers Award for her work with the Dalit Feminism Archive. And in 2020, they were featured in 40 Under 40 by Edex and New Indian Express. Thank you so much to you both for joining us. And before we start, I'd also like to spotlight our Indian Sign Language interpreters, Saurav and Preeti, who will be interpreting the session as we go along. And thank you once again for joining us. I'm so excited to get this conversation started. But as always, I would like to just quickly acknowledge our own position and this unique space that we occupy as people who are having these conversations, as people interested in DEI. And I think even though we may come from different backgrounds and some of us may have a certain kind of privilege, and other people may have another kind of privilege, it's important to acknowledge that we all still have our own journeys and experiences. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Jyotsna.
Thank you, Shambhavi. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Zahara. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you. And just to kind of open up the floor, I would love for you to introduce the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself, about your work, and then we can get into more in depth about talking about DEI, but also belongingness. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jyotsna. Just like it sometimes happens, technology decides to not let me get off mute, but here I am. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be having this conversation. Thank you to the Indian Sign Language interpreters. I tend to talk really fast, so if you need me to slow down, do let me know and I will pace up. Hi, everyone. I'm Zahara Fernandes, based out of Delhi in India. I'm wearing a colorful blue and white top. I have really short hair and I wear specs. Hopefully that helps you put me in perspective. What I do, I'm currently the managing director at Accenture. I work in the space of Accenture operations. I have an absolutely amazing global team, work out of many different geographies. I partner with the global team to deliver value for our client, and that's something that I do as part of my business job. My passion project and something that I'm extremely excited to do is I'm also the India Pride sponsor for Accenture, which means I get to work with a central I&D team with an amazing bunch of people who are very driven to the cause of pride inclusion at Accenture. I have the pleasure of also having set up the Pride ERG at Accenture, and that ERG is called the Fierce Colors of Pride. I think prior to Accenture, and like Sambhavi said, I have but I have been somebody who's done a lot of statistic work, a lot of Six Sigma work. So I've been a lot in the area of challenging status quo, doing projects and transformation. I've been in the corporate space for over 21 years. And it is a pleasure to be talking to all of you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Lovely, Zara. Thank you so much again. And let's begin the conversation that we've been wanting to have for so long. Just from your own experience and from your own work, how do you understand belongingness, especially at the workplace? What does that look like? Maybe for you personally, but also somebody who's managing and at the leadership position. What is your vision of belongingness within workspace?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And I'm going to try and peel the onion, so to speak, right? If you think about the pillars, inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging. I think diversity. So first, many organizations have been at this cause for really long. Everybody's been trying to do something around the space, even before it was fashionable to do so. Even before it was reportable to do so. So many companies have been at it for really long, and I'm blessed to be with one of them. But if I was to break down and peel off that onion, right, I think diversity is one of the easiest things companies have been at, right? It's the easiest one to say, I have diversity, which means I have hired people of diverse natures. And diverse segments. Of course, gender is one of the diverse segments, but along with that, there are many other diverse segments like persons with disability, like persons from the LGBT community. Veterans may be another diversity. So I think hiring meets your agenda of diversity, and I think that's possibly the longest, organizations have been on, right? Inclusion is interesting because inclusion means you include the diverse people that you brought into your organization to engage with you. And I feel inclusion is another element that companies are now starting to be very focused about, to say, when I do an engagement, do I have representation, right? And I'm going to go back and go back many, many decades ago when I was really, really new in the corporate world. There would be client visits and a very senior leader would say, okay, who's going to be in the boardroom? And it was important for women to be in the boardroom at that time, not because they were presenting anything, and not because, unfortunately, not because they were in decision making, but because it was important to show that we are inclusive. We've come a long way. And like I said, we've come a long way. But that's not true inclusion. But inclusion really aligns to the aspect of the action a firm or an organization takes to include diversity in engagement. I feel equity is the aspect of fairness. Very closely resonating to equality, right? So, fair pay, fair benefits, and fair, and I want to say, right, equity is very different from equality. We're not talking about equal pay, equal benefits. And we'll talk a little bit more, Jyotsna, as we go along in terms of what does it mean to be a woman at work and what equity means there versus being a man at work and equity, what that means. And I know you and I have chatted a lot on this topic. So I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later, right? Now, you've talked about diversity, you've talked about the organization's action on inclusivity, you've talked about equity. Where does belonging show up? Belonging is the feeling that this culture is the place that I want to form relationships. Belonging is the fact that I'm interested in the success of people around me. Belonging is a decision I make. It is not a decision that the company can make for me. It is not the decision that my manager can make for me. It is a decision that I make. And that decision that I make is from the experiences that I have. And I think that is fundamental, right? I think the fundamental shift that organizations need to do is, how am I letting people experience inclusion in every step of the way so that they make the decision to belong? And I think if organizations can just relax back and breathe to the fact that I cannot force belonging, I can create the culture of inclusion so people make the decision to belong. I think that is the right way to be. And like I said, like that example that I said where we needed women to be in the boardroom because it was required. Fast forward 5-6 years later, it was very interesting. I was working in one place and a very senior, and in fact, there was a very senior woman who was in the CXO office. She met with me and she said, Z, and I'm shortly called Z. She said, Z, you must be so proud of yourself. You're the first woman to have a cabin in our firm. And I said, fair enough. I'm glad to have a cabin. Let's see how many decisions I make in the boardroom. And I think we will experience true sense of belonging when we go away from these firsts. We no longer need to be first, and we no longer need women leaders. We don't want the first woman leader, the first woman CXO, the first woman CEO. We just need CEOs, leaders, and we want that balance to be fairly representative. And again, when I say representative, extend the balance from genders to other segments of diversity, right? Jyotsna, did I answer the question?
Yes, no, thank you. I'm just keenly listening and smiling because I totally resonate with what you've shared. And also, I feel like what you're trying to say is that this is a step one. And absolutely, we need to go beyond the first, because I think now with the trend that we have, there's a lot of focus on being the first person to do anything. And while that is great, I think it limits the scope of the things that are actually required to be done. And those are hard things. And maybe those are things which, I feel like in order to restore inclusion, diversity, there is a lot of invisible work that happens. And behind the scene work that happens, which starts off from the vision of the organization. Then what is your recruitment processes like? How do you onboard people? So the entire cycle of how are you forming a team, how are you building the culture, who has the decision making. So I feel like there are so many steps which are behind, that requires a lot of work to be able to actually start the exercise of DEI. And just listening to you, I completely kind of like just nodding and saying, yes, there are so many aspects that form within DEI and within inclusion. It's also like an exercise that perhaps also begins with a tick box, right? But then how do we go beyond that? And to be able to really build a culture where everybody feels included, where everybody feels belonged, where is that decision making lay? Like you said that, of course, as an individual, when I'm part of a workspace, there is a certain decision that I'm making to belong there, or to actually find a space where I would make it okay. So when we start working somewhere, there are decisions made from both ends. The employer makes the decision of hiring, but also the person who's being hired also makes a decision of joining the organization or the company. So the decision is on both ends. But what happens is mostly in companies and in the processes, it almost seems like there's only one way the decision is being made, right? And we forget that people we're employing also have agency, also have their own choices, interests, and all of that. So within this, like, how do you sort of, like, you have any thoughts, or how do you sort of see that can DEI itself be an exercise where people can belong, or you feel like there might be other processes or exercises that might be required for people to feel belonged, or for them to also actively make a choice of belonging at a workplace?
You give me a very interesting context, right? So what you're saying is, and I'm just going to extrapolate this a little bit for purpose of conversation. You're saying, is DEI the process where people make the decision of belonging, or are there other processes? I think the first thing I want to talk about is, what is DEI as a process? Now, you said that very, very factual statement to say most DEI actions begin with checklist. And I have no problem with that, right? Because with checklist brings accountability and hopefully the action and intention in the right direction.
Yes.
It is extremely important that the DEI setup be empowered by a DEI team which has autonomy to make policy decisions, right? To influence all other elements of the organization, which will continue to propel DEI in the future. Because if you think about a large organization setup, a bunch of people in DEI cannot really influence every experience that I have.
Yes.
I'm sitting in a client presentation and I'm delivering value in that engagement, and I make a mistake. And when I make that mistake, the way my sponsor, my manager steps in to help course correct for us to collaborate is the experience that I make a decision to belong. And some of my belonging decisions have come out more from my failures and learnings than from my successes.
Yeah.
I think successes are very rewarding. They give us confidence and they give us the assurance that we have competence. I think learnings and failures allow you to make the decision to belong, because when I have failed, when I have learned, when I have made mistakes, I have been supported, and I've had this amazing mentorship, right? I've been supported to say, how can you course correct this situation? How can you build that relationship again? And I think that ongoing mentorship is the decision that people make to belong, which is why organizations will have to get comfortable with DEI being a widespread agenda rather than an agenda of a time of the year, Women's Day in the month, or of the year, things like that, right? We cannot, like, you cannot get the maximum value that you would get from a more holistic DEI initiative, which means, and the way I think about it, and maybe I'll detour a little bit, right? What does a successful DEI process look like, which allows for that decision for belonging? I think it starts from the top, and I always think about it like a sandwich, right? So it starts from the top. Your top leadership engages, drives commitments, puts matrices, speaks clearly about vision and intention of DEI, right? So your top starts there. I don't work only with my top, I work with my peers and I work with my juniors, and thus comes your bottom. Your sensitization, your education to the bottoms up process to say, how do you be respectful and be conscious of diversity, conscious of biases, and how do you work through all of that and navigate that sensitization, mentorship, development, taking my experience and my behavior or my performance from today to my strengths and my ability of the future, those experiences which come bottoms up, cushioned with the right policies in the middle. The right policies where the policymakers are listening to say, hey, women, what do you require in the workplace? Which policies are working for you? Simple as, is maternity leave enough? How can we give flexibility after mat benefits? Is there things that we need to do during the pregnancy cycle, during your monthly cycles? What can firms kind of, listen to you and understand, right? I think that's what a good DEI process looks like. So when I have, and I'm going to quote Accenture here because I think I've made that decision to belong to Accenture. Go back and look at my resume. I've not spent more than 5 years in any other firm before. So I think if you think about that, Julie Sweet is the Accenture CEO, a woman leader, set out a aspirational goal to say we are going to be 50-50 in binary goals by 2025. So the women top leadership is talking about that. In the last 5.5, 6 years, I have had my peers, people around me sensitized on the needs of a woman in workplace. I have had great mentoring, support, development, and I have that cushion in the middle when if something is wrong, something needs to happen differently, I need a different policy, there is people who are listening to me. So I think that entire cushion will make a DEI process successful.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I feel like one of the most important things that I think you've also highlighted is the role of the leadership and people who are making the decisions, people who are envisioning the company or the organization. Are they able to explain or deliver in a coherent manner to their team, to the people who are supporting them, or maybe at the junior levels or at the entry point? Are they able to explain them what the company's vision, goals are? And I think sometimes, like with Gender at Work India, we've had our own challenges because we are a semi-corporate organization, and for us, the DEI is not new. For us, we've worked on institutional change for almost 2 decades and more as Gender at Work Global. So we're an Indian affiliate of Gender at Work Global. So there is a lot of institutional history and memory of having running processes that enables diversity, equity, inclusion without necessarily calling it that. And I think one of the things that I also so resonate with you is that because I have a supervisor, a mentor who supports me with most of my decisions or, my spontaneous eruptions of revelations, and she would support that, and she's willing to go on that journey with me. And I think that I feel within any organization or company, it's so important that the leadership is aligned and is able to support the vision along with the team. And I think that is one of the most crucial aspects, that if I do not have the support of my board or my supervisor, then I won't be able to take certain decisions. And then that also percolates to the team and to the organization, so on and so forth. So I think this is a very, very important aspect, that the leadership has an important role to play, not just to...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add, again, stats background, so I have to throw in some numbers. Better Up did a survey around belonging, right? And I'm going to try and recall, right? The survey led to understand that organizations where belongingness is higher through inclusive actions will see 56% high productivity levels on job performance, 50% reduced attrition, 75% reduced sick days and paid leave offs. For an average 10,000 person company, this means $52 million saving a year.
Right.
belonging is no longer a good to do. See if you can do, right? It is a business goal. It gives you business results. Leave
Yeah.
aside the fact that diversity, belonging together will be the most powerful innovation that you can have there, right? Sorry, I just wanted to throw in this before it slips my mind.
No, I think it's very important. Thank you for sharing the figures and data around it. I think like through our experience, we've seen that it's actually also true with also having worked with different organizations on building their capacities that the more people feel belonged and included in the decision making of the organization or the work that they're doing, the more they're able to also experiment and take risks with the work. And one of the most important things, again, which you highlighted, Zahara, was, do I have a space to make mistakes? Do I have a space to fail? And I just want to add to that what helps with the inclusion and belongingness is that if the organizations create that space without any punitive measure, and if there is no punitive measure or penalty for making mistakes, and you still get to, you still get to improve and still get to keep your job and experiment and learn, I think that really enables people to understand their own role in the organization. But I also feel sometimes it also goes the other way. Because as a smaller organization, we've had our own challenges because we feel that we've been kind of struggling to create a team which also feel belonged, who also, but of course, there are so many factors into it. It's not just that the accountability can be on one or the other, but we've had our own challenges of how do we create more belongingness within an organization where people feel that this is their organization and they have all the space to learn, to initiate, to make mistakes, to collaborate, and to take the organization forward. So yeah, I just wanted to add that as well.
I think one thing, right, that struck me, right, is two things rather, right? One, you talked about punitive action for cause of experimentation, right? I know I'm speaking more generically, and so naturally there is always the methodology of the kind of failure you have and the impact of the failure. I don't think any organization will have an an absolute black and white way to say you can always fail and there will never be an repercussion. And sometimes you tried something new. So there's very difference in, sabotaged failures versus learned failures, right? So there is an amount of, small judgment around that, right? That was one thing I wanted to kind of, bring to mind. The other piece that you spoke about was small organizations versus big organizations. And you said we want to have our people belonging, right? I think what and whose accountability it is, right?
Yeah.
If I go back and think about myself as an employee in a firm, right? I need to be driven to the purpose of that firm. And if that the purpose, and whether you're a woman or a man, you all want to drive to a purpose.
Right.
You all want to achieve credibility. You all want to ensure that you are recognized when you achieve significant milestones. I think it's the organization's responsibility to clarify the purpose that drives people's grit, that drives people's passion.
Yeah.
It is the organization's responsibility to allow for inclusive, respectful culture to develop. But culture is not walls, and culture is not the label of the name of the company, which means it is individuals around who work with people whose responsibility it is to create that experiences. believe that any one person or one portion can decide completely the decisions of belonging. It is very much in the micro habits, in the sweet small spots
Yeah.
that those decisions happen, and which is why, right, you start the journey of belonging and inclusion now, and you may reap benefits a few years later.
So you were talking about the micro habits and the sweet spots where decisions are made, and absolutely, and I feel that that's why it gets a bit tricky, because there is no one way of ensuring DI in an organization. It's always this trial and error exercise almost. Of course, people who are more sensitive to understanding differences and similarities and how to coexist with that might be able to push for certain mandates and policies and certain sort of guidelines within the organization. So the question that I'm getting at is that, do decision makers also require regular sensitization or awareness around DEI? Or is it something we try and do and learn and fail and do? So yeah, your thoughts on that?
And I'm known to be very transparent in my my agreement or disagreements. Absolutely. Nobody is ever always aware, always sensitive. And I must tell you, right, every single moment that you interact with somebody, there is unconsciously a decision, a perception, an image that you are building, which is driven by your past molded experiences. If I go back to past molded experiences, some of those experiences that I may have experienced include the fact that a woman is not good enough. You need sons to propel your family better ahead. So if those are some of your experiences of the past, you attended a DEI sensitization session 2 years ago, your subconscious is not going to remember the 2 years, it's going to remember your 10, 15 years of upbringing, right?
Yes.
So there are many scenarios in which one should do that reinforcement with people. I do believe that reinforcement should happen definitely during all performance cycles in companies. They should happen during important investment decisions in companies. They should happen during important mergers, acquisitions, your board reviews. So I think that sensitization session is not a one and done. It's definitely something that gets reinforced. And I feel, of course, slightly more partial and biased on my end, but I feel it's extremely important for organizations to be bold and take goals on DEI, and then keep tracking their progress on DEI. And some of these goals should include what is the trend of your grievances.
Yes.
And I don't believe that you want to reduce grievances, because even having a grievance means people have the courage to voice out. So you don't want to reduce grievances. You want to look at the impact of those grievances, the resolution time of those grievances. You want to look at, are there different types of grievances, and how you take the trend of those grievances into your sensitization sessions, right? I think it's very important to measure your progress on DEI.
I think that's an extremely important point that you're talking about, the grievance and grievance redressal, right? And I think that's something that keeps coming, because I feel that if there are people, if there is an organization that has diverse team, there are going to be issues. And obviously, DAI is not something that can be, that can progress with a very homogeneous team. It does require different kind of people to show up and drive and set goals and think together. How do we make the organization more inclusive, more diverse? What would it require? I mean, like, this is a very old example, but that keeps coming up in the popular culture, that there was in one of the countries, I think it was Afghanistan, but I'm not sure, that that there were just no washrooms in the organization. And we know this in our own context as well, for women, because there was just no women employees in the organization. So, like, there are so many aspects to it. I feel that when we're looking at the DEI, what we are actually looking at is the architecture of an organization, right? It's like building a home. And what would it require? What are some of the things? How would you lay your foundation? But sometimes you may have designed a very nice home. You have laid out the foundation exactly how you were supposed to lay down. You've got exact, color on the walls and paint and furniture and everything. And even then things don't work out. So the aspect that you're bringing up about the grievance, I think, is so crucial. That what kind of grievances we're receiving? Is there a change in that? Is there a pattern there? And to be able to deliberate on that when we design our processes, or when we design our interventions, or even if we are going and collaborating or meeting external clients, somewhere it would help if we keep those things in our mind, to know that these are some of our issues, and that's where we are coming from.
Again, like I said, right, there is nothing wrong with grievances. I think the first thing that you see the grievance trend, and you give a pat on your back saying we have people who have courage to voice. And that's a very, very important piece, right? So I always reinforce to our teams to say, don't get panicked when you see grievance numbers. I think you've built a culture of openness to conversation and an openness to raise issues. And that also takes a lot of culture development. And of course, we'll work on improvement here onwards.
Yeah. Right. And I think that is, again, so important, that how are we sort of coming into a workspace? How are we holding ourselves? And we talk a lot in our organization about being present, being grounded, managing stress, managing anxiety, because the work we do is so hard and so difficult, and there is no model for it. It's not that we've done it, we know it. It's almost like every day you are thinking out of the box, or you're thinking of solutions, or you're thinking of what would work, what would not work. Sometimes you feel like you're like this mad scientist in a lab, right? Trying to figure out which chemical will go together and which one will not.
Can I add a complication to your mad scientist lab analogy? You don't have an isolated lab that does not have environmental influences. So you're a mad scientist in the world while the world is constantly changing. Pandemic changed what happened in our lives. The pandemic challenged the tokenization of roles of women in the household, the roles of women in the workplace. What does flexibility? Flexibility took a complete new turn. So I think I absolutely acknowledge that the work you all do is extremely difficult, and constantly challenging. Every time you've done it, we've come back and given you yet another challenge to say, here's a new scenario. Can you now make the EI happen here? So it's always evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I do have more questions for you, but one of the questions is that, which we have also deliberated a little bit, but if we can expand a bit on that does DEI have one size fit all approach, or does it kind of extend? Are there different strategies that may look like different for civil society vis-a-vis for corporate? Because we are a semi-corporate organization, and you're coming from a completely corporate background. So are there strategies that differ? Because I'm not sure if there are different ways in which we are working. Of course, there might be some similarities, but are there any particular approaches or aspects that you always sort of work with, or also promote, so to say. Because one of the things is also that, what we are realizing is that it's still easy to talk about gender now and LGBTQI, of course, because decades and decades and decades of work has happened. A lot of social movement, activism work has contributed to this as well. So it's not just the work within organizations, but also external activists and practitioners who are also raising voice and adding to this mandate of DEI within the workspaces, right? When we talk about gender pay gap and things like that, but there's aspects of discrimination and whether respect to ableism, disability, or caste and religious identities. And I feel somewhere DAI is unable to either get traction or really sort of advance the discourse around disability, caste, and faith, and those aspects, even mental health, so to say. So yeah, I mean, just would love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, like I told you earlier, Jyotsna, I'm no expert. I'm going to address this piece, right, from a very human and a woman and a community member from the LGBT community. And I'm just going to address it from that angle and my experience of belonging, right?
Yeah.
I think I am far more than just a woman. And I think we spoke about the fact that a lot of organizations start their DEI journey from that checklist to say, we want to hire, we want to do this, we want to do that. I think that checklist is, like I said before, a great place to start.
Yeah.
But true DEI will grow and flourish in the space of intersectionality.
Yeah.
I love how Sambhavi started us with acknowledging our privilege. The fact that I'm speaking to you now with who I am and all the experiences I have clearly means I have a privilege. It does not mean that I didn't have a journey. It does not mean that I didn't have struggles. I was not born with a silver spoon and none of that. I do have a privilege, which gives me the space to have this conversation. Now, if we start trying to address two questions you asked, one size fits all, and two, how do we widen that canvas of DEI conversation? I think intersectionality is going to be the key player to take us future forward, because each one of us has different angles, and I can speak about, what does my faith and the respect for women in my faith intersection mean to me, my experiences when I interact with my family? What does that discourse look like? The same thing happens at work.
Yeah.
If two colleagues have the same faith system, one a man, one a woman, how does their interaction relay back that intersectionality? We can't take away people's holistic lives from their experiences, right? Yes, you come into work for 9 hours and you spend that 9 hours at work, but all of that 9 hours, you are the net product of all your years of experiences. So I think intersectionality, and I'll stop saying that again and again, but I think intersectionality is going to be the key differentiator. And no, I don't believe one size fits all. And classic example, right? Whether you are in the corporate space, you are in, your kind of a non-corporate setup. I go back in even the smaller circles of even your RWAs, right? In the societies we live in, representation and all of those functionalities will also dictate some of the actions that will happen and some of the decisions that will be made as a result of that. And if that representation is not cared for, the experiences will not be one of inclusion, and there will be the need of turnover rather than belonging, right? So I think representation in those internal core councils become extremely important. It's nice to have a guidance document, but it's very, very important to listen to your people, to understand what are the experiences that are driving people in, out of work, and how can you take that experience to move forward and enhance your DEI practice. So I don't believe there will be a one size, but I love this whole revelation of intersectionality that can take us forward.
I mean, that's a great note, I think, in which maybe we can open up the room for some questions and and see what queries and questions we have.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Because I'm not very new to DEI per se, but belongingness is something which is taking it a step further. So I'm also trying to understand. So when you said, Zahara, sabotaged failure versus learned failure, I'm sorry, it was very complicated. I couldn't understand that. Could you just explain that to me?
And that's a great question, right? I kind of assumed that people can read my mind, and I do that very often. So I apologize for that. I think one of the dysfunctions of lack of belonging, or one of the outcomes of lack of inclusion, is sabotage. Either sabotage of self or sabotage of team. I don't feel, and I'm going to give you an example. I don't feel that I want to contribute to this team. I don't feel like a part of this team. So I'm not interested in the success of this team. So I choose not to work.
Yeah.
That is classic sabotage failure, right? The flip side is I belong to the team. I'm interested in seeing our success, and I try out new ways to do things. I challenge status quo because I want to be experimental. The outcomes for both of this should be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the situation where there is a sabotaged failure, where the person is not able to feel belonged or drive productivity or drive the success of the team, the conversation has to be around what are your experiences that allow you to feel away from the team, and what can be done for you to understand you are an element of this larger team.
Right.
The other aspect is, hey, you tried this new opportunity, new experiment. It did not work. Let's evaluate where it went wrong and how can we coach you to be more successful next time you do experiments. I think in both situations, there has to be that conversation. There has to be a learning from that failure, but it will slightly be different. One will help you bring more inclusive actions for people. The other one will actually elevate people's decision to belong to you. What I wanted to elaborate is the fact that not all feedback conversations or failures will only help your belongingness quotient. So don't get it wrong. You have to do the work on inclusivity before you can let people make the decision to want to belong with you. I hope I was able to answer, Mridu.
Yes, Zahara, absolutely. Thank you. It was relatable to what's happening in our organizations. Thanks.
While we wait for others to ask questions, I feel I also wanted to just understand from both of you whether, there are specific examples of practices, right? Very simple practices, whether it's related to communication, right? Internal team communication, or something which a lot of corporate organizations do, maybe team building retreats. What are some practices which enable belongingness, and like you said, Zahara, diversity in engagement?
I'm going to refer to this excellent work, and I feel extremely privileged to be a part of Accenture because we have a very dedicated, mature practice, both focused on DEI, belonging, but also just the human element of employees, right? We did this groundbreaking research, and we call it the net better of exercise, right? And this said that for human beings to thrive in any organization, you need to ensure that you check off 6 fundamental needs of an employer. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the 6 fundamental needs. You have to touch on emotional, mental, relational, physical, financial, purposeful, and employability, right? And now one of the takeaways, and feel free to go on Accenture and look at net better of, it's an excellent paper, like a really large paper, 30 execs and over 15,000 workers in participated in the net better of survey. Go back to practices, right? There are very crisp 5 sweet spot practices, right? Sweet spot to say that these 5 practices will cut across those 6 fundamental pillars that people require, right? One of them is enable continuous learning. Stop assuming that communication has to be when you go and communicate to the people what is going to change and that's the only way, right? You need to have a lot of listening in sessions. Listen to what people want at all levels in your organization. It's sometimes I feel we listen to the top and we listen to the front line and we forget the middle cushion that actually makes the business run. So you listen to all those fundamental lines, right? Use technology, and you have no choice but to enable flexible work. I think with the pandemic, flexibility has, and just because I can't think of another word, flexibility is now an entitlement that everybody desires in their work life. And I can't think of another word, so I use that word. So listen while you speak, listen to all levels, drive flexibility through technology, champion for well-being and equality, which means your champion, right? Champion means your top leaders have to speak the language of DEI, not just your I&D enthusiast sitting in the corporate cycle, right? Every leader needs to talk about that. And the other one, the one that I personally absolutely love, is set people metric goals, transparently share those goals, have an action plan around this. And so that's the sweet spot 5 practices, Sambhavi, which we have realized actually allow for a net better of experience for people, which will have them stay and want to grow with you. And I think we should definitely add the element of learning, right? So continuous learning, listening, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Zara, for that. I just want to add, because for us, actually, pandemic was a deja vu moment, because we've always been a virtual workspace. And through our work with organizations, we've been telling them that this works, even to the corporate organizations. So, but, the pandemic kind of really brought that home, and for organizations to realize that this is possible. So, the other thing that we actually work with all what you said is something that we are quite mindful of. Another thing that I feel that with Gender at Work India, one of the things that we do want to position and we are focusing on is mindfulness. Like, how do you remain mindful? Not just about yourself, but also about other people, about yourself as well. So one is not mutually exclusive. I mean, you need to think about other people. You also need to think about yourself. But also, how do you remain mindful? How do you remain in the moment of dynamism? Because the moment we feel that we know and we've arrived and we know exactly how to do, I think that's exactly where we go wrong. So how do we continue to remain in the of course, there are things that we know. I mean, that's what we call experience. We've having done something over and over, so we know what that results into. But there will be certain situations and challenges that are thrown at you, and then one doesn't know how to resolve, right? And then sometimes I feel that nobody, like maybe in the organization there might be, if there are larger organizations, the chances of having people more in number who may have some kind of solution is possible. But in smaller organizations, maybe that luxury is not there. Maybe you don't have many people who are sort of thinking of solutions, right? But yeah, I think mindfulness and what we also pay attention is really on heart, body, mind, because we feel we really need to kind of bring this together and work and pay attention to all of that, whether we work internally to ourselves, but also to the clients. So to also kind of tell them that these are important aspects for us when we work, that we do pay attention to. How are we, even in our interventions and processes, how are we empowering someone's heart, mind, and body? So just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely right. I think it's extremely important that you think about holistic mindfulness and holistic development and holistically tapping on people fully, right? Thank you for that ad. I want to quickly answer 2 questions from our chat box. What is an RWA? I'm sorry, I use slangs. Residential Welfare Association. This is usually, your internal communities, your societies. I know it's called different things. I can't remember what it was called in Mumbai, but in Delhi, it's called RWA, which is Residential Welfare Association, where 2 or 3 building and flat members get together and make decisions for the society at large, right? So that's what is an RWA. How can we create true inclusion for people who are not integral part of our organization? And feel free, Asma, to add more if you were thinking, but the way I'm thinking, who are not internal part of the organization, right? Yeah. The way I'm thinking about it, right? If people are not a part of your internal organization, it usually means that these would be contractors, your supplier networks. And I think the way to create inclusion, step number 1 starts with your experiences with them, right? So respect the diversity that they come from, respect the privilege that you have, which makes you more accountable to their lack of privilege, right? And money is a privilege, and power is a privilege, decision making is a privilege. So if in all of those interactions with your supplier networks, with your contractors, with people who are servicing you, and I'll expand that, right? I speak to that with my mother often, to the people who come into our house and help us live our lives, right? My cooks and my house helps. Recognize the fact that you have a privilege and they don't, and your experience and your interaction with them of respect will make them feel included. And trust me, it will change their productivity, making your life better. And I have seen that work in such a small setup as in the house setup. So think about the power if you were to put it in large organizations and set up, right? I think, Ashma, feel free to add if I did not answer, but I think the experiences, lived experiences, create inclusion and belonging.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's like a punchline to end with.
So I would just like to thank you both for this very insightful conversation. And I think because we were really looking to delve into the idea of belongingness, we see how closely interconnected it is to the other pillars, right? And how it has to be enabled, it has to be worked upon constantly. And like Jyotsna said, it there's no one size fits all approach. It has to also be a trial and error method. There has to be room to learn from your mistakes. There has to be room to track grievances and not be afraid of grievances. And I think that was an especially useful I would say insight that I'm hoping that we can all kind of incorporate and learn from. So thank you both. I think this was a great conversation. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and stayed till the end, because I feel it's also an indicator of how people are truly looking to just understand these practices and processes better, right? So they can take them back, as individuals, as professionals. So thank you to everyone for tuning in. And I would also like to thank Saurav and Preeti for just effortlessly interpreting the session. And I hope we were able to do a decent job with our pace and with just the way we were interacting. And once again, we are so glad that you're supporting us on this, journey and, helping us circle back to some really critical and crucial ideas, in contemporary discourse. And thank you so much for joining, and we will see you on Circle Back next month.
Thank you so much again, everyone, for attending, for staying in, for Zahara to be in conversation, and Saurav and Preeti and Shambhavi for moderating this seamlessly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.